Today's episode of Filmmaker U is brought to you by our sponsors OWC. Go to owcdigital.com for all your filmmaking and computer needs. And it's also brought to you by our other sponsors, AJA. Make sure to check out aja.com so that you can see how they can help you in your post-production needs. Hi, I'm Gordon Burkell from Filmmaker U. At Filmmaker U, we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify your existing skill set. You can learn more at filmmakeru.com or follow us on Twitter at filmmaker_u. Every week, I interview a film professional to discuss their work, and this is made possible by our sponsors, AJA. Go to aja.com for all your filmmaking and computer needs. This week, I'm joined by supervising sound editor Ian Cymore, whose work includes The United States versus Billie Holiday, Tiger King, and the sequel to Tiger King, and of course, The Sound of Silence, which I know is an independent film, but it's one I really enjoyed, so I thought I would include that in my introduction for you. Welcome to the show, Ian.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
My first question for you, you started out as working as a live engineer on concerts, and I've been to some crazy concerts. What would you say is the most or the craziest thing you've seen or experienced at a concert?
Yeah, I did a lot of live sound work leading up to post-production. I wasn't like working for big rock groups or anything like that.
That's where it gets a
So,
little more exciting because those were usually the best concerts or the small venue
right,
concerts.
right. Yeah, I wasn't like on the club circuit or anything. I did a lot of theater, like live
Hmm.
sound for theater productions.
Okay.
And and I worked at this music venue called Cymore, which is up in Westchester County outside of New York City. And they did a lot of like classical music and a big jazz festival, which was really, really cool every summer. So, it was more like theater and a few music performances, but luckily it wasn't anything too crazy that would ruin my ears for the rest of my career. But the theater stuff was always really unpredictable. It's kind of what's amazing and not amazing about it. And so, I worked on a show called The Toxic Avenger. It was an off-Broadway
Yeah.
musical here in the city, and there was this big build-up sequence where like you had to make sure that the you know this chaos is happening and you're like keeping everyone's mics clear and the band is going super loud, and like amidst all this chaos you have to get a gunshot, triggered by a sound effect gunshot, to sort of cut through everything. And if that gunshot doesn't happen, like the rest of the play makes no sense.
Yeah.
Somebody has to die right then and there. And so, it was just a lot of suspense, making sure that that happened every single night, and knowing that like you were actually a part of that performance. Because if that doesn't happen, it's like letting all these actors down. So it was a little more than just like doing your technical job. With theater, you're really a part of it. So there were some, wild nights of trying to make sure all of that happened. Yeah.
So what was it that made you decide to transition into post-production?
Yeah. From like a practical standpoint, I thought I was I thought I was going to get something that was a little more 9 to 5, so to speak. As we know in the film industry, it's not always like that. But I knew that I didn't want my future to be working at night when everybody else was going to restaurants or going to those shows.
Mhm.
I didn't want to be, doing that schedule. I think it was already kind of wearing on me, even as like a young person trying to do it. So I wanted to get into post production, to kind of make more of a real practical career. But I discovered it in college because I went to Ithaca College for sort of audio production. It was like a program within the communication school, and I sort of discovered that like doing sound for picture was a really cool way to keep doing sound work. You know, my experience had been in live stuff, but doing it to picture, I kind of latched onto it pretty quickly and realized that it was this awesome blend of like, you know, technical proficiency and, you know, the creativity and, you know, artistry that I was looking to do in any career that I chose. So it was really just kind of that perfect blend of things, and you know, so happens to be a little more friendly for the future than like going on tour with Metallica or something.
Or
It's
the Toxic
tough.
Avenger.
Or the yeah, chasing, you know, a revolving door of musicals in the city is a tough way to make a
Yeah.
living too. But you know, I have tons and tons of respect for those people. It's a really tough job, and they're incredibly talented for taking that on every, you know, night in and night out.
Was there a particular show that you really enjoyed doing the sound for
I
in
really did enjoy Toxic Avenger. I mean, that was kind of the height of what I did. And it was just fun music, like a nice, probably 4 or 5 piece rock band that just absolutely lit up the place every night, and some really talented, you know, vocalists. So like from a audio engineering standpoint, you know, I had to like rise to that challenge, and there was actually good equipment. You know, I the live stuff is just very here and there. What from like my experience and what I was doing at the time, it was kind of dependent on, you know, what budget the production had, and that was properly budgeted, and it was a really cool show, and it was here in the city, so that was really the most fun. That, and you know, Jazz Fest at Caramoor was always a good time too. It's just a you know, a music festival of some really great talented musicians. That's always fun to do.
I knew someone who used to work at the jazz festival here in the city here, and he said the best time is always after the concerts because all the jazz musicians would go to a particular place and just jam. Do you ever sneak in and get into one of those places?
No, I did. Well, I didn't, you know, because the jazz festival I worked on was outside of the city, and
Mhm.
so you know, it was kind of like a retreat for them. So yeah, I the tough thing too, just about that job, is that you don't really get to fraternize in that way, or at least I didn't, because you know, when the show stops, a lot of your work starts.
Mhm.
You know, the tear down and the setup for the next day is a big piece of it. So you know, you'd keep going, you know, through the night,
Yeah.
to kind of, you know, whatever rented equipment was there and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I didn't get to experience any late night jam sessions, but yeah, that stuff's really cool.
Now you worked on Tiger King,
Yeah,
and I'm always interested to hear from people who work in sound the differences between working on a fiction and a documentary. What were some of the challenges that young people getting into this might not be aware of in working
yeah,
on sound on a doc?
yeah. The challenge with Tiger King, and I think it's true of most documentaries, is that the the sources of material are so varied, and you know, you're tasked as the supervisor or the mixer. I was both, to make it a cohesive, you know, looking, sounding, feeling thing. And so the stuff that came from Tiger King, or the stuff that was in Tiger King, especially season one, you know, they started filming like 10 years or something
Mhm.
before it got released. So there's stuff that they did, you know, with a handheld camera and like a Rode mic sitting on it. And then there's other stuff as they kind of realized they had something good, where they had microphones on people and they were really doing like proper production shoots. And then of course there's just like archival and, you know, things from like little clips from the internet, and just like it's much more varied in terms of its source material, and so it's hard to like make all that stuff sound like it's on an even playing field. And we did a lot in Tiger King where basically the dirtiest of the audio was actually what we strived for. And I don't mean strive for in terms of like mucking up good sound, but if there was a scene, so to speak, where people were mic'd up, and there was a proper production sound mixer, like for that footage, we would add back in a lot of like gritty footsteps or just, for that particular doc, there was a lot of like cages rattling and just like kind of chaos of the zoo that we were in, and so we would actually put stuff in that made the really gritty and like difficult bad audio kind of sit even with the better stuff. And so I think that's kind of how we brought everything to a place where it played as like a cohesive piece. I would say, to some extent, there are other creative challenges, but when you work on a film, they filmed it all on the same camera with the same location guy. Like there's certain expectations that you can rely on, and that stuff is, definitely less consistent on documentaries. So, the sound portion of it is very important to making that all sound, cohesive.
When you were putting that stuff back in,
Yeah.
And I apologize if this is like a simple question, but like,
Hmm.
were you going back to like other takes or other parts of the clips, or were you in some cases were you just actually bringing in like sound effects, like, okay, we need some
Yeah.
gravel sound here, let's put in the gravel sound?
Well, we always have the sound effects library, if
Mhm.
we need something in a pinch. But our approach on Tiger King was the first thing you said, which is that like I had the assistant um, picture editors pull a bunch of wild takes that they had from all of these like 10 years worth of footage where, as long as somebody wasn't talking over everything, there were those elements, cages rattling, animals making noises, people just kind of like gritty scuffling around these like dirt paths and stuff.
Mhm.
And so I just had a big string of all of that stuff. And when we needed it in the mix, we'd put it back in. And, I felt that that was a more authentic way to do it because that stuff was really from, the GW Zoo or wherever. And so, in a documentary, you're still creating art. There's still some liberties you can take, but I didn't want to just place, a library sound effect in places like that. I wanted it to be organic from the material that they originally did. So that's where I pulled that stuff.
Now, early in my career, I remember talking to a producer, and they said, if you're doing a doc, make sure to put a lot of money aside for a dialogue editor.
Hmm.
Now, what was your relationship with the dialogue editor on this, since you were also mixing, to
Sometimes I
get it to
was the
sound
dialogue
good?
editor.
To get
Yeah,
it to
sometimes I was the dialogue editor, but on season 2, I just supervised and mixed, and so the dialogue editor who worked on most of the episodes in season 2 was my colleague Josh Berger, and we have a really good sort of working relationship that we've built over the years, so that like there's kind of unwritten or unspoken things that we
Mhm.
we expect from each other when we team up. And so yeah, he there was a lot of dialogue uh, sort of cleanup work to be done, and we just have really talented people who can rise to that. And I agree. When it comes to documentaries, a lot of times it feels like it can be done uh, sort of with a few corners cut, like a few things that you might not need on a major motion picture. But the material itself is often tougher to handle. So yeah, a really good dialogue editor, a really savvy effects editor who can kind of match
Mm.
things that are actually on the screen, like really match the sound of the production. That stuff is really crucial on a documentary.
And how much, so like when you're working on um a production, I guess this would partially be the budget too, but like fiction or documentary, how much do you like to go out and record the stuff?
Yeah.
Like if you needed, let's say, dirt gravel or something, you just quickly run out and grab it, or preferring versus preferring to go to your library.
Well, the library is really, the library that I use is really extensive and rarely misses a beat,
Mhm.
so a lot of stuff is that you develop over time is just your understanding of the library that you're using. So you can really find what you need for whatever project you're working on. But I will say on certain projects where it kind of calls for a level of like authenticity or something really custom, you do go out and record your own sound effects, even if sometimes you use it for like research almost.
Mhm.
Um, you know, a lot of times it's hard because you want flexibility in the mix. So if I'm like trying to create the sound of New York City, I actually want like a layer of just kind of washy traffic, and then like another layer of people and their footsteps walking
Mhm.
on the street, and another layer of air and birds, like all these things. When you go out and you get those, when you get it like, in one single recording, it's all sort of mashed together. So, there's a certain savviness to like going out and knowing what the real world sounds like, and then
Mhm.
using the layered actual sound effects from the library to build that. So like on Sound of Silence, which you mentioned, um, my colleague Grant and I went out and did a lot of Grant Elder and I went out and did a lot of recording around New York City, and it was like the coolest thing, and I'm so happy that we did it. Um, we got tons of just like really true to the locations of the film
Mhm.
sound. But then still, when you're in the mix, that is only like one piece of what you eventually build,
Mhm.
because you take certain creative liberties, and then you want layers of things so that you can actually control the levels of whatever soundscape you're doing, for the director's needs at the time, and you don't want to be handheld to something that you can't manipulate in that way.
Yeah.
So I would say that I've gone out and done plenty of recordings for plenty of projects, and I think it's always valuable. But it's only like sort of one piece of the puzzle at the end of the day.
Now, for Sound of Silence, did you take the tuning forks around and bring them
Yeah,
into
we
the
did.
locations?
We did.
Yeah.
Well, we took the tuning forks around the city, but we also took the tuning forks into our ADR studio and
Mhm.
recorded them on their own, so that we had them really clean, and then you could like add reverb without repercussions of
Mhm.
doing that. And we didn't quite want to rely just on what they picked up, uh, on set for the production, because that production sound mixer is tasked really with getting the lines of dialogue. So that's why you don't, you add footsteps back in, for example,
Yeah.
because the microphones are not on their feet, right? The microphones were, probably more effort was given to those tuning forks because it's like a big
Yeah.
thing, but we wanted to have our own recordings of that. So we had a really amazing recording day where the director Michael Tyburski
Mhm.
came into our studio and performed these moves that happened throughout the movie with the tuning forks, and he was so specific about it, like knowing that like this is the moment where we hear a G tuning fork and
Mhm.
the harmonic resonance that comes from that. And it all had meaning to him because he built the movie around it. So
Yeah.
he really took a hands-on approach, and that was like a really rewarding day. That whole project really, kind of a jumping off point.
It was afterwards were you like, I gotta make sure the sound in all my rooms are perfect and at
Yeah.
home, so I don't have bad
Yeah.
sleep and
I was probably a bit hypersensitive after that movie, and I remember, Michael consulted with somebody who's sort of like a longtime acoustic engineer for Dolby,
Mhm.
and she is somebody who I'm forgetting her name. I think it was like Poppy or something like that. But she is someone who like travels around the world for work, and like she gets to a hotel, and if something is just odd in the room with the standing wave of sound or whatever's going on, she like has to switch rooms. So like they found the person that was like the character in the movie, and yeah, I was probably a little hypersensitive, but I try not to bring too much of that, work home with me. I can let it go.
That must be very frustrating for the hotels to be like,
Oh
you're
yeah,
having what problem now? And
yeah,
discount off of
exactly.
it.
Strange request, like what? Usually it's an actual like something's not working.
Is there in your career, is there a particular scene that you're really proud of the work you've done in?
I am really proud of that scene in Sound of Silence where uh, Peter Sarsgaard is sort of at the window of this New York City uh, empty New York City office building, and we do this transition between like the sounds of the city start like flooding into his head, and you just hear all different things like a street cart and a bus go by, and all these things kind of you know accumulate and exponentially get bigger and sort of more overwhelming over time, and then it like becomes this sound of an orchestra tuning their instruments. And so we did some really cool work, which doesn't always happen in the way it should, where like we teamed up early on with the music composer and the music team, to kind of send some sound ideas, like sound effects stuff that we were thinking of using, tones and this stuff, towards them, and they were sending us, sounds of like that particular element, like the sound of an orchestra tuning up and that sort of thing. And so we really had like a you always try to achieve it, but it doesn't always happen, like a pretty seamless um, handoff between sound effects, sound design, and music. And I think it happened in that scene in Sound of Silence, and that was really kind of a moment where we were very happy with the result, and Michael, the director, was very happy with the result, and it was kind of like, this is what we should strive to do on projects going forward. So
Now, I have one last question for you. We've been stuck in this pandemic for quite a while, and a lot of people turn to streaming networks, as I'm sure you're aware with Tiger
yeah.
King. Is there a show or a movie you discovered that if someone's stuck inside for a bit, they should check out?
um that I discovered, I watch Ozark a lot. I like Ozark. I think most people have discovered that. I'm a big fan of Succession. I've been watching that. um I watched a film called Rounders recently, Matt Damon movie about sort of underground poker playing, recommended by a colleague of mine, and it is streaming. It's available, I think, on, and I can't remember, Hulu or one of those services, and it was a cool kind of like throwback to the '90s style of filmmaking, where like there's just like cool music playing throughout, and you're sort of like in a world that you don't live in your normal life, and there's voiceover like explaining what's going on. Some styles that have sort of fallen by the wayside, but it was a cool throwback to like a bit of like nostalgia '90s movie making. So I'd recommend that. I mean, the other thing, as we were talking about uh, theater and live sound, what I've been missing in the pandemic is going to concerts or going to live shows. So I've been watching a lot of stuff in that vein. Like I made sure I caught In the Heights and Encanto and Tick Tick Boom, like to kind of fill that void of not being able to go to the theater. And then I've been really loving the HBO Music Box documentary series. There's one about Kenny G. There's one about like Alanis Morissette and DMX and Woodstock. So those I've really been digesting kind of fully, and probably filling that void of like the large gatherings we used to do. So
So how would you define the 90s like sound of a movie?
I wouldn't be the expert to define it. I was too young, but there is I don't know. There's kind of a I think there's a grittiness to it. Like I think we really polish sound these days, and I kind of try to resist that urge. I'm working with Ed Burns right now on season 2 of his TV show Bridge and Tunnel, and Ed Burns came onto the scene with Brothers McMullen, a $25,000 movie basically, and went to Sundance and became popular. So his roots are really in that, like, it doesn't need any more than what it says it needs. If it's not on the screen, we don't need to hear it. And so, like, I think that there's a simplicity and like a kind of grittiness to the 90s style movies that that I've been sort of doing and trying to achieve here on this TV show with him. Obviously it's now a bigger budget than what he did with Brothers McMullen and other low budget things he's done, but it kind of still has that like indie roots of we really want to hear this dialogue, we want to play some cool music, and we want to feel like we're there, and not sort of do too much outside of that might feel artificial. So I think that's what happens in a film like Rounders, and sort of the pace of that I like the pace of a movie that really kind of like obeys like the songs, not obeys the songs, they come after, but like plays in time with those kind of songs that they definitely wanted to get in the movie. And that's something that Ed definitely does too. So like they kind of it all sort of plays to the rhythm of the song, or the song luckily kind of plays to the rhythm of the scene. And so that's sort of that I don't know, character of sound that I think happens in these sort of earlier 90s films, and we're bringing it back with season 2 of Bridge and Tunnel. So
well, thank you so much for letting me interview you.
Thank you. This is an ultimate pleasure. Thank you so much.
I'm Gordon Burkell. Thanks for watching. Today's episode of Filmmaker U is brought to you by our sponsors OWC. Go to owcdigital.com for all your filmmaking and computer needs. And it's also brought to you by our other sponsors, AJA. Make sure to check out aja.com so that you can see how they can help you in your post-production needs.